We are on the air, and I'll even play some intro music. I got this all worked out. This is
Do it live.
this is
Doing it
this
live.
is this is the live. This is Unblocked podcast live. The we're launching right here. I'll put a little music on. This is my background music. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unblocked podcast live every Monday and Wednesday, noon Pacific. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. My guest today is Richie McGinniss. Richie is the head of the video department for the Daily Caller, and I picked up on their work early on. When did you guys get out into the streets and start covering the civil unrest in 2020? As I said, I picked up on your work. We'll talk about Kenosha. We'll talk about the Capitol, which both of us were at. But when did you, at what point in 2020 did you and your team of videographers, who had the most extensive team of any that I had seen out on the streets, when did you guys get out there?
Well, I was actually in New York when during Memorial Day with my family at home. But that first weekend when DC, erupted into riots, St. John's Church, there was a fire lit in the basement there. There were dozens of stores that were looted. Our reporters were on the ground for that, and I returned that Monday morning that was the day when Trump presented the Bible in front of St. John's Church. So in terms of DC, that was really the beginning of it. And we were on the ground from the very first moment. One of our reporters, Jorge Ventura, he was actually an intern, literally had just landed in DC that week. And he recorded the footage of Leland Vittert, the Fox News White House reporter, being assaulted in front of the White House. And that really kicked things off in DC. That was the Friday night of that weekend. And then obviously the next two nights were utter chaos. So we really were there since the beginning. And then obviously we went beyond just the District of Columbia in terms of our coverage.
Right. When I look back at that weekend, which would have been May the 30th and May 31st, because that's what I was in Los Angeles, and then Santa Monica subsequently on the 31st. That's what kicked me into it personally, was seeing what I saw play out in Santa Monica in a very coordinated way, I might add. So it sounds like you're there. The DC team is there. That would have been after the night that Trump went into the bunker, right? Because that was early on in that weekend, I believe.
Exactly. That would have been that weekend. And I arrived on that Monday morning, which was Memorial Day Monday. And then that was when he presented the Bible at St. John's Church the next day. And actually DC at that time had I think it was 6 or 7 p.m. curfew. But given how late it got dark at that time, it was still bright out. And we had a situation where luckily I had my credentials on me, but the police basically kettled everybody who was protesting down in front of the church there on that day. And luckily, because we had credentials, we weren't arrested, but everybody else was.
That was amidst the attempt, I believe, at one point to pull down the Andrew Jackson statue. Is that correct?
No, so Andrew Jackson was later in that was later in June.
Okay.
And that was in mid-June. And I actually was there for that as well. I saw on Twitter just basically people erecting barriers down there around the statue. And I had my buddy drive me down. And from the moment that we were arriving, we saw Secret Service and Park Police loading up with riot shields and basically running in the direction of the statue. So I just ran down there and actually was one of the first reporters on the scene. Because our footage was really the only footage that was that close while they had the ropes around the statue. But and I was subsequently cleared out and pepper sprayed by Park Police, in my efforts to show what was happening on the ground there.
This is a complete hole in my knowledge. I of course know of it, but as I indicated earlier, I didn't realize it was in the middle of June then, this event. And what did they, how prepared were they, in the sense that we're talking about, just so the audience knows, we're talking about the leftist bloc in Washington, D.C., trying to take down the Andrew Jackson statue for which one person was charged as the ringleader, a man named Jason Charter, who admits that he's openly Antifa. And what were they do? How were people dressed? Were they in black bloc? What did they have that they could conceivably tear down the Andrew Jackson statue?
They had ropes, so they were clearly prepared. They had a plan in place, and they basically like erected makeshift barriers around the statue with some of the fencing that already was there. And so they kind of dragged it over to try to defend the position. But by the time I got there, there were only maybe 4 or 6 park policemen who were basically retaking the statue from about maybe 50 or 60 protesters. So if you see my footage, you can see like the park police are basically outnumbered at that particular moment. And it was pretty tense, the standoff that ensued between the protesters who were originally attempting to pull it down and then were separated from the statue and pushed out. And I was right in the mix of it. I actually was wearing my fake news slides. I was not prepared at all for the situation that was, going to unfold. But I was just sitting on my couch on a Saturday, a hot summer Saturday.
So. Right. And were they just trying to pull it down with manual strength, or did they have any kind of machinery?
Yeah, they were. And that's exactly, they basically had about maybe 4 or 5 ropes wrapped around the statue. And I mean, it's pretty effective if you can get 15 or 20 people yanking on it. We've seen statues come down around the country with just that power alone. And I actually saw multiple fences get pulled down in Portland in front of the courthouse with the same kind of method, just, brute strength. Get 10 people on that rope, you can yank it pretty hard.
Oh, wow. All right. And so that was, at what point were you and your team in Seattle? Because CHAZ/CHOP, whichever one it's supposed to be called. I'm always confused, but
I think the politically correct now is CHOP, but CHAZ is the colloquial one. Yeah, I like CHAZ more.
CHAZ is catchier, but why was CHAZ an issue? Z standed for zone, and then P standed for protest, I believe.
It was Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
Right.
So but then they said it's not an autonomous zone, it's an occupied protest.
Okay. So then they
which
changed
is more in line with like Occupy Wall Street rather than, they're trying to make their own country, I guess. It's more diplomatic.
And at what point were you in Seattle? Around
that was right when the CHAZ sprung up. We actually left like I think 1 or 2 nights before that young man was killed in his car. And yeah, so we were there kind of at the peak of it for maybe 5 days, me, Shelby, and Jorge. But that was a cultural experience in and of itself as well. I mean, it was just I think the newscasters were right in calling it a festival-like atmosphere during the daytime, because it really was. It was, like just a giant block party basically. But at night, that's where that characterization becomes more problematic. And I think a lot of those newscasters were only spending time there during the safer hours. So
right. Well, that's certainly a theme that we've seen. Both you and I have been to numerous cities over the course of the last 8 months, and the expulsion of the mainstream media essentially has been consistent in the sense that a lot of us who are out there, I figured out with Brendan, with you, that certain people were popping up in my footage with different perspectives of the same events. How would you characterize the expulsion of the mainstream media and their overall either involvement or lack thereof over the course of 8 months?
I would say, just generally characterizing it, I would say they didn't really have boots on the ground in the same way that a lot of the independents like Brendan, who you mentioned, and our team, as well as some others who, have been traveling around the country covering these protests, Julio Rosas being another one. I think the more the digital media folks that you just referred to and that I did were making an effort to spend time on the ground and really just, soak in what was happening at all hours of the day. And when you have these network operations, they have a live view, they have a bigger camera, they have a private security team. There are all these different, it's a much more cumbersome and conspicuous operation. And so I think we're able to kind of blend in and immerse ourselves more and be more of a fly on the wall rather than, become part of the story when a newscaster comes into this autonomous zone, saying it's very much a party-like atmosphere, as you can see here over my shoulder. And it's, there's a lot of fanfare and it's a kind of a showbiz operation. Whereas we're just, trying our best to be a fly on the wall and record what's going on to show America, what's really happening. And I don't think you can really achieve that with the kind of traditional network methods.
And certainly it resulted in Denver. I had completely forgotten about the shooting death in Denver.
It was private security. Yeah.
It was a private security who wasn't authorized to have license to have the gun that he had, and who shot and killed a Back the Blue supporter in Denver. So certainly I just realized, there's so many stories, so many layers, so many cities that we've been to. In some ways, it's been hard to tell this story in the terms of one national story, because it's really dozens of local stories that have played out in their own unique autonomous way, I would say.
Yeah, and there's each of the protest zones around the country have their own unique flavors and kind of makeups of, what kind of actors are in there, be it, genuine protesters, people hell-bent on chaos, on looting, on attacking police. There's different varieties around the country, and it's interesting to see the way that those makeups change.
Yeah. And one of them is Minneapolis, because from what I could tell in Minneapolis, there hasn't been a ton of black bloc like you see in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, D.C. Yeah. But I don't know if people know this, but there is currently an occupied Minneapolis zone called the George Floyd Square.
Yeah, I went there with Shelby, and I was really surprised because I hadn't heard anything about it, and they had security and all that stuff. It was pretty genuine autonomous zone.
When did you go? I'm just out of curiosity.
This was in October.
Okay, so I went in December, after December the 12th. December the 5th, in which was where you had that mass sort of. No, wait, it was December the 12th, right? That in Washington D.C. where you had the Proud Boys.
Yeah, that was December 12th, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I get some of my dates confused, but that was the big Million MAGA March too, and we'll go over.
That was the second one, right? Yeah, because there's one in November, one in December, and then January.
Right, November the 14th was the first one, and we'll get into that.
I was there for all of them, so I can fill you in.
You're a DC person, so we'll be able to really fill people in on how everything built up to the Capitol. Because remember, the Capitol was really chapter 3.
Yeah, there was a buildup for sure, and I mean, it was definitely. We discussed this previously about the. Watching after the election, the MAGA and Proud Boy crowd turn on law enforcement and really start. I guess it manifested itself a little bit differently because their distrust of law enforcement was based around them enforcing the institution of the elections that they thought were corrupt. But there really was a striking similarity to their turn on law enforcement and the way that the BLM movement turned on law enforcement over the summer, but in their eyes them being an arm of the corrupt criminal justice system. But in any event, to see the way that the MAGA and Proud Boy crowd turned on police over those 3 different events, it was really, in the first one they were still very much back the blue, I think, and then after all the videos of everyone getting assaulted in BLM Plaza and stories of people being routed straight into kind of like a meat grinder and police really not doing anything to defend them. I think that really did a lot to change their opinions.
November the 14th. That was Million MAGA March 1. So that's after the election of Joe Biden. And so you are at a position where the people who are the anti-fascist bloc in DC, and they mostly are operating under the code anti-fascist, whether even though they're in the anarchist garb and using anarchist tactics. I would characterize DC's Antifa bloc as being very combative with their perceived political adversaries. In other words, the right. And what we saw on November the 14th at sundown, if you look at all the daylight video, it's the left attacking the right, and not Proud Boys, but it's in some cases elderly people, and it's people who who represent white supremacy from their, sort of rhetorical perspective, but aren't, militants by any means.
Well, that clip that Trump tweeted of the old man getting his bike knocked over and getting kicked while he was on the ground. If you watch the full video that Matt Miller, is another reporter in DC, recorded, you can actually see after that clip ends, I helped him up, because that was one of those moments where you say to yourself, okay, I'm looking at this through the lens of my camera, but it's happening right in front of me. And, this is just an old man getting kicked on the ground right now. And like, take off your journalism hat for a second and just like ask everybody to just stop, because that's one of those moments where, that I think in spending so much time in these protest zones, I think you see humanity on both sides, and you see kind of the desperation that's there. And so I think that's just a really like kind of heart-wrenching moment when that kind of stuff happens, when things turn bad like that.
And certainly you were up close in another situation where you very much were immersed and sort of were pulled in a way that a lot of us can't imagine, and that's Kenosha. Mm-hmm. And, there might be some limitations as to how we speak about it, but because mm-hmm. you were right there mm-hmm. When the first shooting and the death of Rosenbaum took place, it was, yep. You were right. Can you just speak to a little bit about, like, when you look back on that, about mm-hmm. what was the emotional state, because people message me about the Capitol and they're like, how did you keep calm and anything? But there wasn't a reasonable amount of safety, even when you're in some of these protests, that does not match, in my mm-hmm. mind, what you witnessed in Kenosha on that day when you're filming, and both Rittenhouse and Rosenbaum, Rosenbaum chasing Rittenhouse, go mm-hmm. essentially by you. Can you just set up what you were filming at that point and what your emotional state was? And the question on all our mind is, how did you hold it together?
Well, I didn't hold it together because I wasn't filming, because I was on the phone with Shelby right before the shooting took place. And because I anticipated that something was about to go down, because I had seen Kyle running through the street with the fire extinguisher in one hand and the gun in the other. And I had interviewed him just about 10 minutes prior. Actually, it was about 15 minutes prior to the actual shooting. And so I recognized him, and I was on the phone with my coworker Shelby, and trying to triangulate where she was, just so we could make sure we could meet up and make sure we could both watch each other's backs. And that's right when I heard the yelling. And I hung up the phone, and I thought I pressed record, but I didn't actually. I hit just the photo button. So I was running behind them and paying attention to what was happening before me and not my phone. So I didn't obviously realize, but I think the moment that Kyle turned around, I ceased to be focused on anything related to generating news or content. And, it was more concerned with, my own proximity to his gun, as well as after the shots were fired, that guy, Rosenbaum, I didn't know his name at the time, obviously, but he was clearly in mortal danger after what I saw. That was completely obvious, given how close I was. So there really wasn't any thought process that really went through my head. It was more just, I was so stunned by what I had seen that all I could do was just try my best to remedy the tragedy that was unfolding. And that's just I think it's a moment where there wasn't even a moment of consideration. It was just kind of I guess fight or flight type instinct.
Right. You because you go in and you take off your shirt to be used as a tourniquet of some sort,
or whatever. I saw multiple gunshots fired at such a close range that I figured I actually pulled my mask and my shirt off, because I figured that there would be multiple gunshot wounds. But then somebody shouted that there was a hospital across the street. So at that point, it was like, there was no, I didn't really see any value in us trying to address any of, his injuries if there was literally a hospital across the street. And we got him there about like 6 minutes after the shooting happened.
Right.
Obviously, he's still passed away. But I think another, interesting aspect of that is that the tunnel vision. I didn't realize on the night of that when after Kyle shoots, he runs around the car and comes back around. And at that moment, I was actually crouched over Rosenbaum's body, and I saw these pair of legs arrive next to me, and I yelled, "Call 911!" And then I stood up and took my shirt off. And actually, I turned and almost faced Kyle, but you can see in the video I'm looking down at the ground to pull my shirt off, and I'm not focused. I didn't realize that it was Kyle on the night of. And so, in that moment, I didn't realize that the individual who had just shot the man in front of me actually ran back around the car, and that he was the one who I yelled at to call 911. So because I was just so focused on what was in front of me, I didn't even notice that it was him.
Okay. Wow.
Now, which my mom was not happy about.
What's up?
My mom was like, "That guy with the gun was behind you." I mean, she was not happy about the vulnerability that I was in that situation.
Right. Okay. I see. Yeah. No, certainly. Did you realize that the first gunshot came from the periphery? From the New York Times confirmed this. I think they were the first ones to analyze the video and break the story. They had an expert, the New York Times did, who in sound and who evaluated the gunshot sounds.
Yeah.
And clearly the very first shot that you hear is a handgun that is different than the shots of the rifle. And that was something, when did you learn about that? The New York Times, I think it took them not too long, but they came out with that.
I had all kinds of people sending me all kinds of crazy stuff in the days afterwards. So I had seen a lot of like internet YouTubers and stuff who had referenced that muzzle flash that you can see in one of the angles. On the night of, it wasn't really clear to me, like I was watching what was unfolding in front of me, and I heard what was a pop, but they're flashbangs or fireworks, and obviously they're different sounds. But in the heat of that moment, I was so focused on, because basically that pop goes off, and that's right around the moment where Kyle turns around. So from that moment, I was much less concerned with that pop that went off over there, and much more concerned with the situation that was unfolding in front of my eyes. So for me, on the night of, it was clear that it came from somewhere to my left, which is, if I was basically facing the same direction that Rosenbaum was, with the building to my right and the street to my left. And so the video, watching it after the fact, corroborates that the pop went off from over there, but it just wasn't immediately apparent to me. After the Kyle fired his, I guess, 4 shots, you can hear more gunfire after the fact, and that was much more apparent to me. And luckily, Rosenbaum had fallen like right next to a car, so I actually was ducked in relative safety behind the car. So yeah.
Just random guns being shot up in the air. From what you can tell, that there's so many, even during the second volley where he trips and falls, there are all these other gunshots that conclude it, that are being fired from just random handguns, right?
There were a lot of guns present in Kenosha, for sure. And talk about the different flavors of the different protests. Definitely less organized Black Bloc Antifa, and more just kind of people, out there to burn some cars and, smash up a car lot. So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, because the day of, my mom said, is Kenosha safe? Are you safe? And I said, yeah, it's safe, but there are a lot of guns. And she was not very encouraged by that. But I guess my implication was that, it wasn't like Portland, where these people are like well versed in adversarial antagonization of police. You know what I mean? That it was much more like, okay, the cops come out, spray some fire, shoot off some tear gas, and then they disperse and just start burning cars in the adjacent neighborhoods.
Gotcha.
So It's interesting, the differences.
Well, there are a couple things that I think people don't realize about Kenosha that night. And there's a couple of things that I can list off right offhand. One is that the Black Lives Matter protest ended hours before all of the shootings, in the sense that the actual official protest, I watched the live stream from Reg Incognito, and I was someone who was watching everybody's streams that night. So I was taking it all in from everybody's different perspectives and what they were posting. But the actual official Black Lives Matter protest ends before 9. And then another group comes in, a more militant group that goes up against the city hall. Were you there at that time at the city hall?
Yeah.
So
I was there basically from sundown through the shooting. I did stop in my hotel to get Wi-Fi literally about 20 minutes before the shooting took place. But I basically documented the entire lead up to those protesters being pushed out to the lot where Kyle was eventually standing in front of with the other armed individuals. But that was actually one of the things that I had documented earlier in the night, where the multitude of, there were so many brick fragments, and it's not clear to me, why they showed up there or who brought them or whatever. But actually earlier in the night, I was filming just the field of bricks in front of the police line that had been thrown, and I was actually filming them flying through the air, and there were just dozens and dozens just right in front of me. And
you're talking about at City Hall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think also that was probably the longest police line I've ever seen. Like there were, maybe 150 cops all lined up in one line, and they marched into the park in front of the courthouse to clear out all the protesters from that entire park, which is basically, that's where they were. They were throwing bricks and stuff like that from there.
Well, that certainly changes my perspective. I didn't realize that there were so many bricks there, because
there were a lot of bricks.
my question was why, and this for me goes back to Santa Monica, May 31st. One of the mistakes that I saw made in Santa Monica was the police were focused on a peaceful protest that was in a residential area. And then another protest sprung up. Then they used tear gas to disperse it. Mm-hmm. Well, when you disperse a crowd like that, then they were all sent to just City Hall, where they were breaking windows. And then for blocks and blocks to the east, they burned down, in some case, businesses and vandalized them and looted them. So which begs the question, is it better to just keep a crowd like that contained, not disperse them, especially if you're going to send them in the direction of militia and businesses?
That's definitely a good question. And I mean, I think it's in Portland, it would always be the protesters would get pushed out and then return back to the courthouse. The courthouse was like that symbol. They were attacking that symbol. So they were less keen on like just burning down businesses than what we saw in Kenosha. But I think that's an interesting question, because there is a certain aspect of, you can let people go and bang up against the fence and scream all they want. But the moment you start using riot control munitions and banging them with shields and pepper balls, then it really does escalate the situation. So I think it's a good, law enforcement should consider those kind of things.
Especially when they're sent out towards militia and businesses, and I think that's what had me scratching my head. Now, of course, the presence of bricks and everything that was being thrown at the police, I'm sure that's another part of the story, and there's probably other parts of it that we might not see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's another thing. That's why I always try to put myself kind of in between the two groups, because you want to show what police are doing to protesters, but also vice versa. And I think, over the summer, we've seen it on both sides, but it's not like we're trying to document one side or the other. You want to show the whole situation as it's unfolding. And obviously, protesters aren't very keen when you pan the camera back to them. They're always happy when you're filming the police. But if you switch the camera to them, you have to kind of be subtle about how you do that, because protesters, let's just say, they don't like to be filmed, generally speaking.
Right.
At least in 2020.
Right. And tell me a little bit about your team being out there. In other words, a lot of people might think because you're known as a conservative digital outlet that you would only tell one side. But in conversations with you, but even before we met, I knew that I could see that the material that was being presented without, it was you were giving us the goods. You were telling us this is what's happening, and that there wasn't any pressure, or it seemed that there wasn't any pressure on us to go one way or another with the material. Can you tell me about the approach editorially that you guys have had? Because I know you've had the most people out there. I'm curious how the approach has been.
Yeah, well, I think definitely, we're viewed by the greater media as a conservative news outlet, but I think really it's more nuanced than that. And really the Daily Caller is kind of an anti-establishment outlet, insofar as, the establishment being kind of the conventional PC narratives that the media drives, not only on the left, but also on the right. There are corporate entities that run these media organizations, and they have special interests that aren't necessarily in line with the American people. And so I think the Daily Caller, very much our brand is about, bringing the truth to the American people without any of those corporate overlords. And so I give a lot of credit to my CEO, Neil Patel, and my editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Ingersoll, who give my team and I a ton of autonomy in terms of what stories we want to cover. And, the only thing that they really implore us to do is to cover it fairly. And I think in this day and age, it's really hard to imagine a news outlet that doesn't have a political agenda. But I think that we really do strive to, cover these difficult demonstrations, or, whatever you want to call them, riots, or as objectively as possible. And I think in order to do that, you just have to have people who are passionate about showing America what's happening, and have enough, I guess, Shelby and Jorge are pretty tough cookies. And so I think the combination of those two things, it's actually quite easy once you're on the ground. You just say what you see. You just try your best to objectively tell the audience, what you're seeing from on the law enforcement side, to protesters, to rioters, to the business owners the next day, if their businesses are damaged, to people who live in the community who have to deal with these demonstrations on a daily basis, to lawmakers. So we try to tell that full story without, filtering or ignoring any of those perspectives or voices.
Now, people may not believe you. People may think, well, you have conservatives, and I'm sure that you've heard a lot, because people say, hey, this is who founded it, and so therefore it must be biased. But how have you been posting content? In other words, are you guys for long takes? As somebody who's there as a videographer, how has your approach been as far as letting people into what you see on the street?
Well, I think I used to work at NBC as a production assistant, and I made the conscious decision of going to the digital realm rather than working my way up that ladder of broadcast news, because I think that there's been a real democratization of media that's taken place with the improvement of camera technology. And I can hold my phone in my hand and stream live video to tens of thousands of people on the Daily Caller's page. And so that ability to provide an unfiltered perspective, just simply by being a fly on the wall and filming what's happening, I think that's kind of the approach that we have, which is that video has the power to, you don't have to tell people what they should think about it. You just have to show them. And so I think we've just tried to make I think Shelby, for example, she does a great job of, using those vignettes of raw video to string together a cohesive story on why these people are out there, what their, goals are, and, what their struggles are. And then I think what you get out of that is, I don't want to say it humanizes the subjects in question, but it gives you an understanding into the desperation that's there, which I think is, with this one-sidedness that we have in our political landscape right now in our media, that really gets lost, which is like, why are these MAGA people out here doing this? Why are these BLM people out here doing this? And when you actually see that, I mean, you obviously know, you can see the strife and the struggle in these people's eyes and in their voices when they yell.
Did your all perspective change with the events in Louisville? Because you guys were there on the date in Louisville when they announced that there wouldn't be charges against the officers, and the ensuing marches and actions, direct action as it's called on the left, that took place. How many of your reporters got swept up?
Shelby and Jorge were down there. I was actually at home with my family, and I was literally calling the police station every 30 minutes for the entire night. And I was talking to Shelby's dad. She was relaying messages from inside of the can. But I was honestly, I was pretty glad that I didn't go on that trip, because they were stuck in that jail for 16 hours, I think. And I mean, Shelby and I had a situation in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, where I was actually billy clubbed and then detained by police. And so I think in both of those instances, Shelby, Jorge, and I have discussed at length what it was like to be on the other end of, to actually be on the receiving end of, I don't want to use any charged terms, but, getting beat up by a cop. I mean, that's what happened to me. And I think, Shelby and Jorge weren't treated very kindly in Louisville. And I think the dehumanization that you experience when you realize that you're completely helpless, and you're lying on the ground and you have four guys pinning you on the ground, and one of them's, taking his time whacking you with his billy club. I think that feeling that helplessness is definitely a learning experience that I think it's really easy to be an armchair quarterback and, say the cops should have done this, the cops should have done that. Or, all cops are good, or whatever your agenda is. It's a whole different thing when you're actually experiencing it, in real life. It's eye-opening, I guess.
And what precipitated the event where you got clubbed? I mean, was it just that they had issued a order for the crowd to disperse and people weren't, and so you were perceived as being with them? That's happened to me a couple of times. I'm curious what led up to that.
I believe it was Alvin Cole was his name in Wauwatosa. His mother was being arrested and I was filming it, and I had my credentials actually in my hand, and you can see the footage on Twitter. But basically, they said they told me to leave, to vacate the premises. I could have stood my ground, technically speaking. It was after curfew, but I had my congressional press credentials and I was filming the arrest of Alvin Cole's mother. That's a significant news event that I think should have been covered. And, if I'm not there, and then the police are free to do whatever they want. So I think that's part of the reason why she was making a scene. She was yelling. They wanted me out of the area. And I had Shelby in the car, and I tried to make a decision, just to get out of there, quit while I was ahead, because the cop told me to vacate. So I left, and I actually had the credentials in my hand, and you can hear on the video, I get back to the car and another police officer must have seen me or something, and he's saying, "Get on the ground." And I said, "Yes, I'm pressed. Yes, sir." And as I was in the process of getting on the ground, I mean, I'm literally getting on my knees, I was tackled. And I guess, when I got hit the first time, they want you to spread out and lie face down, spread your legs, and put your hands behind your back. But my first instinct when I got hit first was just fetal position. So I curled my legs up a little bit, and then that's when they really pulled my legs out and were just, beating up on my knees. And I still have like a little bone, overgrown bone where I got whacked there. I think it was like a little hairline crack, wow. But it doesn't hurt. It's just a, nice little bump I got there to remember while we towed by.
Damn. It's these episodes, Wauwatosa is probably the episode I was focused the least on. I did see also other reporters getting thrown
Yeah, that was Brendan.
That was Brendan, right? He got thrown
so that was
to the ground.
that camera picked up. I'm already on the ground on the other side of that vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah, so when Brendan got tossed out, I had already been put on the ground and whacked up. Yeah, so Shelby was right there, like literally looking outside the window as I was getting beaten before she got pulled out of the car as well. And they were not like polite in terms of how they handled Shelby as well. So
this is, as you said, there's so much regional. I've been saying regional differentiation with all of this. I think that's the best way that I can put it. That no two places are the same, with probably the exception of Seattle and Portland. That's separated by only 2 hours and change, and it's very much a connected scene and similar in a lot of ways. But if you compare Portland to the Upper Midwest, or you compare the Upper Midwest to the San Francisco Bay Area or to DC, they all have a different characteristic. I want to show you a clip right now that I basically. This is, I'll rewind this. This is Minneapolis, and this is Minneapolis on the night that the precinct burned. And I spoke to it was a foreign press agency that actually shot this video, and I've previously contacted them. And what's interesting about this is the fellows you see in the foreground are organizers or part of the Black Lives Matter protests. The people who you're going to see scaling this fence are a noticeably different demographic. And it's hard to know what to make of it, especially in terms of what we've seen you and I experienced at the Capitol, because I will reference that again in the Capitol and what we saw in terms of looking back at the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct. I'll roll this clip. Now, the last moment there is a woman telling the young man in the red hat to come back, and he's awkwardly holding a golf club that you can see there. This clip is interesting, and she's trying to get him to come back. This clip is interesting in a lot of ways. First, because these are the first guys to scale the fences. This fellow who I've seen in other videos taunting the police, who's masked there with the gloves. This man with the Bermuda hat, who's part of the Black Lives Matter protest, seemingly organizationally, he's saying this is not what it is what he tells them. Then this guy, you could see him pumping the crowd up as they are banging the fence down. And then we'll see that this guy in the World War helmet and another lanky fellow up there in black crossover, and then this older guy, this old dog, doesn't even have a mask on, and he's just I can't imagine how easily identifiable he would be. Now you could see that after seeing this clip, I got into this whole thing thinking that there might be some sort of infiltration, some sort of and then for a very long time I tabled that theory in favor of, well, this is anarchists, and this is anarchist behavior, and it's consistent with anarchist uprising. But what's interesting is that they did move as a team, and then you got this guy in black bloc who's up, rattling the fences, and then you have some people who are just sort of standing around there who aren't sort of privy to what the heck is going on. Any impressions in seeing that clip compared to stuff that you've seen? I'm just curious, someone like yourself who's been to so many cities, when you see that, what comes to mind for you?
I mean, what comes to mind is that I think something that's consistent across all the protest zones is when all it takes is a couple of agitators to, and I use that word, I mean, I think it's kind of a charged term, implying that somebody's paid or something like that. I think in regardless of, what their motivations are, it's very clear that in these protest zones, there are certain actors who are intent upon creating chaos rather than, voicing their, civic right to protest. And they're out there to antagonize police and to, sow the seeds of chaos. And so I'm not sure like where those people come from, what their motivations are. Like you said, if it's just kind of self-motivated anarchists, or if there's some kind of greater, organization behind those agitators. But it really, I think it's hard for people to realize from home how much, how much a group can be riled up and kind of motivated or rallied to, beat on cops and do these terrible things that we've seen happen around the country. And so a lot of the people who get sucked up in that are just, they're not necessarily with those intentions, but it doesn't take many of them to make it happen.
The influence that the worst actor can have is exponential. Mm-hmm. One person really just intent on chaos. It's extremely infectious. And to compare something like this to the Capitol, where everybody's trying to dissect who was who, there's another theme that I like to bring up, which is that you have to have a kind of critical mass. Enough people that are united in their intent, like we saw at the 3rd Precinct, even though these are very different causes, like we saw at the Capitol. They were united in their intent. The group is at critical mass. Mm-hmm. So whereas these chaos agents, so to speak, can have influence and can influence a crowd, they also are not completely divorced from the zeitgeist, the feeling of what the crowd is motivated in mm-hmm. some way to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think especially in a situation where you have, riot shields and, all it takes is a couple of people to start banging into those police to get people riled up. And you just need a couple of, pepper spray and tear gas. And that really just escalates things like we were talking about earlier. A lot of times it's the riot control munitions that really those are the kind of tipping point where people start to go crazy and, engage with police in a more aggressive manner. So I think, it's really hard to say. But I think one thing was it was extremely evident in Portland, how distinctive those two groups of people were. The people who came out around sunset to demonstrate by the courthouse and, had their signs, were chanting, doing their protest. They go on a march. But then there are the people who came out there specifically to antagonize police, after the sun goes down, come 11 p.m., 12 a.m., they're going for that fence. They're taking it down. That's their intention. They're bringing metal saws, they're bringing ropes like we talked about. So,
or in the case of the January 6th at the Capitol, I rewatched some of that video, and I think it was shot by Elijah Schaefer of The Blaze. At 12:53 p.m. is when the first folks mm-hmm. start to come.
Yep, I know that clip you're talking about.
To the barricade. I timed it. Within 30 seconds, they're at the barricade. Within 90 seconds, they've completely removed the first barricade, and the dozen Capitol Police are overwhelmed that quickly. So again, you can point to a Viking, you can point to John Sullivan, the sort of anarcho-leftist chaos infiltrator, if you will, or you could point to all of these, this guy's a supremacist, or, because he has a hoodie that says this. Mm-hmm. All of these weird characters that we fixate on, we forget the characterization that the mass populace is essentially working very quickly in a collective intent in some ways. Now, I want to elaborate on that because there's been breakdowns from both the Atlantic and the New York Times, which I think are very interesting. I've spoken a little bit about them as to who was there, what percentage of what groups were the makeup. And that's really interesting. And I'm interested to get your feedback on that. But first of all, as we go through the Capitol, I'm talking about the west side, which is where that massive group started. Even at 12:53 p.m., while the president is still speaking, they start to push the barricades. I've watched video of yours that is further up, closer to the terrace, and maybe you can pinpoint it for me. But there's a huge tower that's there that I think is for during the inauguration for cameras to go up.
Exactly.
What is it?
Is a media tower for inauguration. Exactly. And
that's where I think I see your first video is near the media tower.
So I arrived like, I basically had a friend who was working on the Hill who said, I see Capitol Police running. And I wasn't even planning on going down to oversee our reporters on the ground until sunset. Cause like that was during the last Stop the Steal. That was really when things, you know, got dangerous. So I rushed down there, and from the moment I arrived, they were already pushed up against police. There were already hundreds of protesters gathered at the police line. And basically what I did, you know, knowing that it looked like things were about to burst, I climbed up that media tower. And I actually was like holding onto the scaffolding to get the highest possible angle. I was holding onto the scaffolding and I had my legs wrapped around it. And my mom, it was her birthday, she called me as I'm filming the police line. And like I had to like take my arm and like ignore the call, like my poor mom, and I ignored it. 2 different calls from her. She forgave me after the fact, but and I already talked to her that morning. I'm not that bad a son, but I basically had that perspective from up high where you can see how overwhelmed just numerically the protesters were. I mean, sorry, the police were by protesters. And actually in some of my footage, you can see a lot of the protesters had pepper spray as well. And the police did not have, most of them didn't have gas masks. So they were just not prepared to deal with what came their way on January 6th.
And I try to, and this is going to go back to our Million MAGA March 1 and 2 experiences, which, and I try to tell people this, and those who are watching who are familiar with me saying this, we expected it to go down at night because that's what had happened on November the 14th and December the 12th. In some ways, I was sitting watching the president's speech in a motel and thinking to myself, I'm not going to get out there this early because I got to go till 1 or 2 a.m.
Exactly.
So I'm not going to show up at 9 a.m. That was my thought. That was my thinking, and why I was caught flat-footed. I didn't even bring a gas mask with me, even though I had one back in the car. So, and that's because November the 14th, you had peaceful protest at Freedom Plaza. Sometimes I know in December, I think it was, there was also these peripheral protests that were either at the Supreme Court or they were at the Washington Monument. But you had the main Freedom Plaza rallies, which had zero.
It was quite organized.
Yeah, they had zero conflict to them. Yeah. And because of that, what we saw on November 14th was those folks who are crossing near Black Lives Matter Plaza. When you look at all the daylight video, those attacks are happening to basically MAGA normies. And they're not, one of the very successful propaganda points from leftist DC media, I've noticed, is that they convinced people that they didn't attack first on November the 14th. And if you look at the video evidence, they clearly attack the leftist black bloc clearly attacks first on November the 14th. And you know that because it's daylight. It's as simple as that. Then in the evening, the Proud Boy types, you can speak to this because I wasn't there. This is another day like Kenosha that I was pulling video and analyzing it. But maybe you can speak to the difference of, and correct me if I'm wrong because you were there, I wasn't. So does my characterization match up with yours as far as how I saw the daylight video? And there's one exception, which is the Rome jacket guy.
Yep.
And you can talk.
Jorge, that's Jorge who recorded that.
Right. So if you'd speak to that, how, and then what took place at night, so we have a better understanding.
Yeah, I think the Proud Boys in that first march weren't as prepared as the second one in terms of coming out in numbers and antagonizing a fight. But after the events of the daytime, like you said, BLM Plaza. Basically, I think it was a combination of the fact that a lot of these people who, you know, they don't spend their time sitting in BLM Plaza in DC covering protests. So they don't realize that kind of BLM Plaza is the epicenter of that kind of anti-MAGA rage. And so when they went to go to their hotels or they went to go, you know, walk by the White House, they thought it was just, you know, a little tourist zone and not realizing what they were walking into. And so
that's an important point, that the White House is only a block or a half a block really from Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Exactly.
So if people were going towards the White House, they would have been in the vicinity of Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Exactly. And that's like a very traffic street, H Street, right down there.
That's a good point.
It goes right through, you know, that's like one of the #1 tourist zones. And so I think that they weren't aware, but after that video came out, and, you know, with the exception of the guy that you were talking about, there were definitely some antagonists on both sides. But I think overwhelmingly during the day, it was basically, you know, a handful of MAGA hat wearing folks who walked in there and just didn't know what they were walking into and got water dumped on them, or they got punched in the head, or they got their hair pulled. And after those videos, you know, surfaced, I think the Proud Boys went out for revenge or whatever. And so I think the fights, the most vicious fights that happened on that first rally, November 14th, were outside of Harry's Pub, which is where, you know, the kind of the Proud Boys watering hole, if you will. And some of the Antifa Black Bloc protesters, you know, realized that they were down there and went down there, and that's where the worst confrontations took place. But the next rally, I think we saw the Proud Boys come. That was the most Proud Boys I've ever seen, East Coast or West Coast, in one place. And that in that instance, they were just out in the streets already ready to roll, like, you know, F Antifa, F Antifa, F Antifa all day long. So they were looking for a fight the second time around.
I might have a really interesting clip of mine that we can look at in regards to that second time. But here's a quick question. Have you ever seen the right, being the Proud Boys mainly, or attack people who were not identified with the protest movement? In other words, have you seen them attack people, even as a mistake, that weren't Black Bloc types?
Yeah, Shelby and I recorded 4 or 5 Proud Boys beating the crap out of I think he identified himself as a John Brown Gun Club member, but he was not wearing black. He was wearing jeans and like just a normal looking jacket, and he wasn't masked up. But I think the interesting thing about that situation was that I think that individual actually might have seen Shelby and I. You know, the Proud Boys were providing security for some people who had brought American flags into the CHAZ. And so we were following after the American flag individuals left. The Proud Boys were still there.
Sorry. Go.
Oh, no worries. And so basically we were following them, but I'm not sure if this guy saw Shelby and I and knew that was his chance to antagonize them in front of, you know, reporters who would capture the event. And I'm not sure what caused the confrontation, but basically we heard a ruckus, and this one guy had gotten his phone taken by the Proud Boys. They smashed it and they, you know, beat the crap out of him. And in the footage, actually, you can even see it looks like he grabbed for one of the Proud Boys' guns. They were a couple of them were armed. But
this was where again?
This was in the CHAZ.
Oh, in the CHAZ.
This is just outside of the CHAZ. But I think that was an instance where I'm not sure what caused that confrontation, but when we rolled up, what it was is, you know, what we captured was, you know, 4 or 5 Proud Boys beating the crap out of a guy who looked like he was just wearing street clothes.
Gotcha. See, I hadn't seen incidents like that in my experience, which has been Sacramento. And it might be, look, you know, I'm willing to look at the whole story. I'm not trying to take a side here, but I saw rallies in Sacramento and in San Francisco, because two places that I was at that were unique to my geographical location was October the 17th in San Francisco, when the organizer Philip got his front teeth.
Philip Anderson.
Yeah. So I was there for that.
Those two groups actually use the name Antifa. They're called Berkeley Antifa and Antifa Sacramento. And those two groups, when they came together a second time on December the 5th, I saw them beat a couple. It was very reminiscent in my mind of the young couple on November the 14th. I actually spoke to this young man from DC. He was in a red hoodie and he's shielding his girlfriend. Did you see that footage? Or was it? Yeah.
She gets her hair pulled.
Yeah, she gets her hair pulled. And the person who's throwing chemicals on them is an Antifa medic. In other words, has an actual Red Cross patch and is dressed as a black bloc medic and is throwing not water, but they said it was a type of chemical that was thrown on them. So I've seen the similarity between the November the 14th attacks that were unilateral during the daytime, again, at the beginning, against MAGA normies. And I also saw that same thing on December the 5th in Sacramento. So it's interesting to hear of other situations that don't fit that are, like you mentioned, up in Seattle. And certainly there's probably some, smattered around the Midwest. And this is something that I forget, is that my experience is my experience. But the more we have these conversations and pool what we've seen, we'll get a fuller picture.
Exactly. And I think that's the point, is like, you have to rely on the people who spent time in these zones and, not just somebody who's sitting in a cable news studio pontificating about the significance of, criminal justice reform or whatever their agenda is.
Now, I know you have to go in a bit. And so I just want to breach a viewer question, which is interesting. When you get asked, well, people must have known. There was a breakdown, as one viewer is mentioning right now, of protection for the Capitol that people must have known. The video that I pulled up next is December the 5th, in which both sides just went at it. I was among the left bloc when they moved on the Hyatt Place Hotel. Then they moved on the Capitol Hilton across the street. And then this is one block east, which all of a sudden a MAGA Proud Boys group showed up. I'd be curious if you were among this melee or not.
I definitely, I was right in there.
Oh yeah,
I was bouncing between the two groups. Actually, I got yelled at a million times by the Proud Boys because I had a skateboard.
Right.
It was definitely a trigger. That's the last time I'll bring a skateboard to a Proud Boys march.
Yeah.
But
Now, so people understand this is December the 5th, and what happened was the Black Bloc moved. They coalesced around a park, and the Proud Boys already came, and there were two huge MAGA marches two Black Bloc marches that took place that went in different directions.
They had like an F the Proud Boys sign too.
Yeah,
sign they made. So this was like planned ahead of time. That confrontation was written in stone.
It was consensual, and people were expecting it in some ways, that these two groups would go at it. Now, the leftist bloc on November the 14th had a sign that said "Punch MAGA in the face."
Yes,
which they delivered on.
It was funny actually too, because I had my skateboard. I was bouncing between the two groups, and I was listening to the Proud Boys, trying to locate where the march was, and I had just come from the march. I knew exactly where it was, but I wasn't about to, tip off the Proud Boys on where the Black Bloc march was. But it took actually more time than I thought for them to eventually find each other.
You're talking about December the 5th or
December the 5th? Yeah,
December the 5th.
The Proud Boys did not have very good scouts.
Well, they were all running around in like groups of 6 or so, like maybe they were like local chapters or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't seriously organized.
They were just like, they'd appear out of an alley all of a sudden, and they'd be talking with it. It was a very bizarre scene. And then the Black Bloc groups were two huge groups. Now this was an interesting turning point, because let's see, I'm trying to look at a map. Here I'm, I guess, west of Black Lives, because Freedom Plaza is to the southeast of Black Lives Matter Plaza, correct? Or
Freedom Plaza is Black Lives Matter Plaza, effectively. Are you saying
no.
Are you saying Lafayette Square?
No, so Freedom Plaza is where the MAGA rallies happen.
I see what you're saying. Yes, Freedom Plaza, that's correct. It's
south.
That's southeast.
East. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So now I'm on the west. I'm on the northwest side of Black Lives Matter Plaza. This group popped out of an alley. This group that you see like right here, and they're consisted of Proud Boys at the point, but a lot of MAGA normies. They popped out of an alley to march from the west of Black Lives Matter Plaza. So that's the opposite side from which MAGA people came from on November the 14th. So it was some sort of, in my opinion, tactical push on December the 5th. And watch what happens. It just...
The Trump people just showed up to face off. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, dude.
Can you hear taser?
Yep.
And then this is the black bloc now coming in from Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Good.
Look at, he has a red flag that he's chasing.
Yeah.
Out.
Yeah.
And then there's some normies. It was just...
Yeah, and these guys are ready to roll.
Now, where were you during all this? Now the police are coming in.
I was somewhere... wow.
Mace.
Yeah, well, I was definitely somewhere right around here because this is K Street right here.
Yeah. But you can see that some people are ready for combat.
Yeah,
and some of those are Proud Boys that are in full helmet, black bloc like tactical gear, and then some people are just. And then it was madness. I think it was the most chaotic that I've seen these groups. Feel free to talk over it because it just kind of goes on.
Yeah, no, I was definitely like. Yeah.
Anyways, the police came in, and then they at that point, I guess they had their back to, or they were trying to separate the two. At one point, one police supervisor picked up a petite young woman who's in black bloc and carried.
Yeah, I remember that clip was crazy.
Just dropped it. I have a different view of that exact same clip from my perspective later in that. But so when people talk about the Capitol, this is what I think myself and probably your team was preparing for, was we were going to get the sequel to this, that we were waiting for part 3.
Yes,
of the nighttime feud, political feud. And so to go to the Capitol, I don't think a lot of people, expected that's where it was going to go down. So go ahead. Is this old or live? Oh, is this older? What is that? That clip was from December the 5th, everybody, just so you know. The prior clip that I showed was from Minneapolis on, which would have been May the 28th, I believe, which was when the precinct, or was it the
29th, I think?
No,
that was that Friday?
When the precinct fell. I'll have to relook at that. I'm fuzzy on the dates right now. It was either the 28th or 29th, I believe. I believe it was the 28th that the well, I won't say. I'll look it up later, so I don't look stupid saying the wrong date. But the police precinct video was from Minneapolis, and the unidentified. It was
Friday the 29th.
It was the 29th? The
Friday was the 29th. So I don't know if it's on that Thursday or that Friday. I can't remember.
Yeah, I seem to have Thursday in my head for some reason.
Yeah,
but because I know Friday, then after the precinct fell, you had everything spreading from Portland to Seattle to LA, where I was. There were heavy downtown protests that night.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to let you go, but it's sort of a last impression about the Capitol. Another incident for you. I mean, you were there up close. At one point, you lost your phone on the other side, and I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but
we'll save that one for another day.
Save that one for another day.
Yeah, we're working through that situation.
Gotcha. But last time I left off with you at the Capitol, you're by the media tower. This is when they've already come from the lawn. the edge of the lawn. And what people may not understand is it's 2 to 3 football fields length.
Oh yeah.
From the lawn where the street is all the way up to the terrace.
Yes.
Now, at this point where the media tower, that's what I'd probably call the lower terrace. It's where the steps are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from there, what was your experience?
Exactly, because once I saw people going into the building, I knew that, you know, this was like going to be an event that, you know, let's put it this way, that would capture the entire nation's attention. And I thought it was important to get up in there to show, you know, what was happening inside. And I wasn't sure if people were going in there to vandalize or to try to storm the floor or whatever. And actually, when I ran in, I showed up at the house doors where a protester had wedged himself up against the door and the window was broken. And that's the image with the guns pointed on the other side of the guy. I was basically on the other side of that door. And at the time that I was there were like 15 protesters and like 2 cops. And they were the only ones, you know, keeping them from actually opening those doors. But basically, when I arrived, there was a cop trying to get this guy off the door, but they were outnumbered at that time. So it took them maybe 10 minutes to get everybody cleared out from in front of those house doors. And, you know,
about how many people, when you got up close to the entryway of the Capitol, but how many people were already in there? This is the west side.
There were like probably like hundreds of people had already entered in the building, because it took me a while to get down from the scaffolding to then go. And I mean, because of the way that the inauguration things were set up, you basically had to scale, you know, the wall. And so by the time I got up there were some police, you know, at the entrance, and it's like they were just so overwhelmed that they couldn't really deal with the flow of people.
Did you go up the wall or the scaffolding? Because there were also these 2 scaffolding.
No, so I went up the wall because the scaffolding was
packed.
It was packed, and I was like a little bit worried about.
Yeah, I thought it was going to
climbing up on it. Exactly. I was like, I'll take my chances with the stone wall.
Yeah, people were on the interior of the scaffolding too.
Yeah,
like monkey barring their way. So it was like.
But yeah, then it took police maybe an hour to clear everybody out of that main rotunda, and I think that was some of the most important footage that I captured, because I think it does show a fair bit of determination on the part of police in terms of the size of the crowd that they were pushing against, and you know, kind of the dilemma of being in the halls of democracy, you know, with some of the most precious artworks imaginable right there. And, you know, like, do you use pepper spray in a situation like that? It was pretty limited in terms of how much of that I saw, versus they basically just slowly pushed everybody out. And in one point in the clip, you actually hear one of the protesters saying, I can't breathe. And then the cop says, I can't breathe either. And so it was kind of a desperate situation, because both sides were getting pushed from behind and nobody was willing to give ground. And, you know, we were just sandwiched in between.
What eventually cleared people out?
Just brute force. I mean, some tactical police showed up as well, which I think helped to kind of, you know, up the intimidation factor. And it did take a fair bit of time, though. I mean, you can see on my Twitter timeline, it was a stalemate for a while. And the thing is that the doors of the rotunda are like maybe 20 feet wide. So all the protesters were getting forced out there, but then everybody was getting forced out of those doors, was basically pushing back. So the group that was still inside of the rotunda was bottlenecked at this door and just getting pressed from both sides.
And when you were in the rotunda, there seemed to be some lulls, and this is what's confusing to people, because if you cherry pick the lulls where people are just chilling, it looks like, then you don't show the chaotic life-threatening scenes of crowd, crushing force, and you just show the lulls, then you get a very skewed perception. And there were some people like lighting up in the rotunda.
Yeah, that was my clip. It has like 10 million views on Twitter.
Oh yeah. I could see from those clips. I mean, that there were these lulls where people were taking a much different rebellious attitude than the one when they're actually physically clashing with the police. Exactly. But yeah, so just to sum up, And just so everybody knows, like I was in the last breach. So what hour was this that you were, or what time was this when you finally got out? Because my live stream didn't take place till the 5 p.m. hour. What? I'm sorry.
When we got forced out of those the front doors.
4:30.
Something like that. Yeah.
That sounds right. And then I end up. I end up with this sort of straggler, weird fringe group, live streaming that group at after 5 p.m. So, so that's accounts for our different experiences. But certainly, I think you shed some light on that. And in the end, then they had to be pushed out of that main rotunda.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it took a while, but I mean, it took literally an hour probably.
And the last question is, was there any sense that the folks that were over on the east, because I know a lot of the patch wearing oath keepers were on the east side where Ford Fisher was actually documenting. And was that east crowd able to come into the rotunda as well? Or was that
some guys wearing like, some tack gear who were in there? And you can see my footage in the final crush getting pushed out. There's some people with gas masks. There's some people with tactical helmets, and so there were definitely mixed into the kind of like, you know, the MAGA guys and the guys rolling up the doobies. There were some guys who looked like they had showed up ready to roll. I didn't see the guys like with the zip ties and stuff like that. I think that they had already vacated the rotunda by the time I got in there, but I did see some of those type looking guys for sure.
What about racist imagery? In other words, the imagery of the Capitol is very different than the imagery of Charlottesville, for example, where you had banner carrying white supremacist groups. Did you see anything that represented that by any chance?
I saw some Confederate flags the previous MAGA march in December, but as far as like Confederate flags or racist like attire, I didn't really see that in the Capitol. But like, I also was probably paying less attention to that than I would have, you know, in a normal protest environment, just because of the chaos of the moment.
Right. I was looking for guns as well. Did you see any guns of any kind?
No, I didn't.
I didn't see any.
I saw crowbars. I saw some crowbars, and the interesting thing is I saw a couple of crowbars discarded by the windows where they had been used to smash the window.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, don't hold on to it, I would guess. But yeah, there were 3 gun arrests total on the Capitol grounds. There were 6 total in on that day, but 3 of them were 1 to 2 miles away. And the last thing that I'll say, I keep saying last thing, but I do want to get this information out to you. They estimated, according to the Atlantic article, which was written by the Chicago Project of Safety, and they estimated that there were about 800 or so that were inside the Capitol at one point. And and they said 1 out of 10 only had a group affiliation, such as Proud Boys or a militia.
Interesting.
And of that, 11 of them, at least, are Proud Boys. So, of the 193 arrestees that they evaluated. So, of the 193, you had 11 Proud Boys. You had 13 that demonstrated some sort of QAnon attire or leanings, but when you really analyzed it, it was only 1 out of 10 that had a group affiliation. So that's 90% that weren't affiliated.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, just given the number of people who seemed to not even realize the gravity of the situation that they were in, and just, you know, had just kind of, I think, almost wandered into it, if that even makes sense. But I think it was, by that point, it was like, you know, there were no police stopping you from walking right in. So some of the people that I saw were just kind of, you know, looking around in wonderment. And there's that classic clip of everybody walking inside of the velvet ropes, which I saw as well.
Right. Yeah. There were memes about that, about you break in and then you stay within the velvet ropes.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks, man. There's so much. I mean, we could go for hours, and I know you got to go. You got a lot going on, but I'm going to address a couple more topics to the live stream, so people know how to find you on Twitter.
At Richie McGinniss, RichieMcGinniss on all platforms.
Right. Okay. On all platforms.
Wait.
I know it's
backwards. Yeah.
You have to have green screen training at a weather wall.
There we go. Yeah. Right there.
Excellent. Richie McGinniss, thank you for being with us. And
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll have a lot more to catch up on another time.
For sure.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, folks, that was Richie McGinniss. I can answer some questions if you have any, and maybe play a couple more clips. I think what is interesting about Richie's experience is he almost became a participant several times. It was interesting to hear his recount of the Capitol because it does differ from mine. His experience in Kenosha is obviously unique because he's the one who's there, and he could tell him he told us that he wasn't actually filming. He didn't have the chance to do that because he was on the phone. But that's when Rittenhouse and Rosenbaum, who was chasing him, run by him. And he becomes, in a sense, a participant in the action because he takes his shirt off and tries to address the fact that somebody's been shot. So I'll show a couple of clips, perhaps, from Kenosha because we really didn't have the time to go over all of them. Part of that might be my fault. You know, there's so much to cover and so much more that I would have loved to talk to Richie about. I made a list here and I didn't even have a chance to really look at it, but we covered a little bit about, we didn't even talk about the Boogaloo, which been characterizing this week as third party extremism, as it takes from both the libertarian right and the libertarian left. We talked a little bit about CHOP. I didn't even get a chance to ask him if they ever spent the night at CHOP or how many days they were around his team. So there's a ton that I would love to catch up, but we did talk a lot about the Capitol. And if anybody has any more questions about the Capitol, maybe what I'll do is I'll play a clip. I got to get used to this. This is a new concept, the live stream for me, and I'm going to start doing this on Mondays and Wednesdays at noon for now, but we might change it to another time depending. But we're going to start this as a Monday, Wednesday podcast where I'll talk to guests. I actually had a really great podcast conversation with an activist, Kim Brown, who's also from what they call the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And we had an interesting conversation. She's an activist on the left. She hosts a show called Burn It Down with Kim Brown. And it's going to be interesting as we get more people talking to see what people agree on. And she and I spoke for an hour, which I'll be releasing on the podcast. So if you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, you can find Unblocked Podcast. There will be some audio only podcasts that come out. And I just recorded one with Kim Brown. It was interesting as we get more people from different perspectives talking. It's going to be interesting to see what we agree on, because Richie and I didn't even get into his opinions. I just wanted to sort of go through his experiences and what he saw and what was unique that he witnessed, especially being a DC local and having been there at almost all of the actions in Washington, D.C., what his perspective was. If anybody else has any more questions, feel free to chime in. I'm going to play a clip here from Kenosha. This is something that I didn't get a chance to talk to Richie about, but in Kenosha, this is a clip I call Dodged Bullet, and you'll see why in a moment. There's Rittenhouse running. This is video shot by Brendan, who will be our guest on Wednesday. So tune back Wednesday at noon. Suspect trips. Now I freeze frame here. The first shot actually misses an African-American male. The skateboarder comes in. He's just shot there to his heart and he dies. And then that man had his bicep blown off. But what a lot of people forget is the first shot of the sequence. That one. Watch this man as he now walks to the camera limping.
This is what I like to, or I want to point out. He's not a black bloc head to toe. He doesn't have a backpack or riot gear, no affiliation, no weapons, and he's wearing a pedestrian COVID mask. And he is a black male that seems to be more of what you would call community. When you are discussing Kenosha that night, I think it's important to put in the context of just how dangerous it was with, and first of all, we didn't talk about the Rittenhouse case. Obviously, he was underage he's under 18, and so wasn't of age to carry a weapon like that. But just having a weapon like that and being in that situation, I just wanted to play that clip because people might not realize that Mr. Rittenhouse was a couple of inches away from lodging a military-grade round into the head of a middle-aged black man that you saw in that last clip just narrowly escape the first shot that was fired. So there are always things when you review this video that you may not know. Now, here's another interesting clip about, and I would have loved to have and maybe the next time I talk to Richie, I'll get his reaction to these. As I said, this is the first live stream episode. Here's a clip of Rittenhouse offering medical.
Can you guys step back? Medical, EMS right here. I'm an EMT. Need a medic? Medical, EMS right here. I'm an EMT. Need a medic?
There's a medic right here if you need help.
What is it? Turn the shot. All right, we're gonna go over here. Cover. I need cover. I need cover.
Out of business.
I am an EMT. You are injured. Come to me. You got any injuries?
Yeah, right over here.
Bring him over here. We got a medic.
No, he's right behind you.
Thank you.
You got nailed with a projectile. No.
So this is after the second protest, I would call it, was expelled from City Hall. And I'll tell you why I played this clip and why I played it and the other clip with him almost shooting somebody another person in the head. But the truth in all of these situations is messy. It's incredibly complicated, layered, and it's not simplistic. It's simplistic to call Mr. Rittenhouse a white supremacist because that is simple in terms. It's not supported, however, by any evidence. Again, he was offering medical attention, not in just that clip that I played, to the Black Lives Matter protesters themselves, but he does it throughout the evening. There's another stream that's called the Rundown Live. And in that stream, you see him offer medical aid to Black Lives Matter protesters several times. Now, when there's an actual trial, I'm sure all this will come out. What's interesting is that it's almost this sort of Boy Scout mentality of I can fix everything. I'm a medic. At one point, the live streamer tells Rittenhouse they have their own medics. Get out of the street. Quit interjecting yourself. Get out. They have their own medic. He's like, no, but I'm a medic. So this MO plays itself out throughout the live stream. He does it like 3 or 4 times at least. It's on tape, offering medical aid and saying, I'm an EMT, I'm an EMT. And at one point the live streamer says, look, we know you're an EMT, but they have their own medics and get out of the street. Don't try to, and the live streamer from Rundown Live even says to him, don't go over to the dumpsters and try to get involved with that. Just let that happen. Just protect the property. And the over exuberance, I think, is a part of the story that gets lost when you just say, oh, it's white supremacy. And it's also just not supported by details. Now, that said, again, I played that first clip of the second volley where the round misses the community member, his head, by just a couple of inches, to also show just how freaking messy and dangerous this was. So when you look at the Kenosha story, this will be back in the news because remember, you have trials ahead and you'll probably have civil suits and you'll have criminal charges, and the truth will be battered about like a political football. Again, that metaphor doesn't hold up, but you know what I mean? That'll be thrown about like a political football. And all of these videos will be relevant at another time. What else to discuss? That was Richie McGinniss. If you're just tuning in, you can look back when this live cast finishes in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so when I wrap up. We went over the Capitol. We went over his job overseeing a digital team at over a dozen of these incidents as civil unrest that I've been in, and his perspective. And you'll notice that we didn't argue a lot because, quite frankly, we've seen a lot of the same stuff in our perspectives. I think because of that, we didn't even talk about politics. I don't even know what Richie's political beliefs are, quite frankly. Even though, again, he does work for what is perceived as a conservative news outlet, I don't think the coverage that they have been doing has been biased in that sense. And people are welcome to chime in and give me evidence if they disagree, but that's just my perception. When it comes to actual political ideas or what we think needs to happen going forward, I do get into that. We didn't for the last hour and change, and that's because I think when, if those of you who tuned in and saw me speak with Ford Fisher, tune in on Wednesday when I speak to Brendan Gutensfager, BG on the scene. Both those guys are true independents in the sense that I didn't think that they're not trying to engage in the way that I am, in the sense that they're even more unbiased. They're not trying to really, I would say, that's just from my perspective. I'm trying to come up with progressive solutions. They make their living, I'm talking about Ford and Brendan, about being unbiased and then, licensing the material that they shoot to different outlets. So Brendan's going to be the guest on Wednesday. So that'll be interesting to talk to him and get his perspective. He's been in Tampa, actually. Brendan's this guy, BG on the scene, who's just been everywhere. You can't believe that he actually made it to almost every single event. He was even in Tampa filming the, street celebrations, I guess you could call them, that get a little out of hand as world champion celebrations do from city to city. So I know he's probably in transit today coming back from Tampa, but we'll talk to him. He was at the Capitol just like I was, just like Richie was, just like Ford was. When we start to put these notes together, it would be really interesting to have a four-square conversation with all of us and see if there are things we disagree on. But you'll probably notice that we don't disagree on a lot because, universally what we've seen is mainstream media not being there and making a ton of mistakes because they're not there and pushing political agendas and bias that lines up with their viewership, whichever, outlet they happen to be. That's a very different experience that mainstream media gives you. I call it screen reality. That screen reality is very different than the street reality, which guys like Richie and his team at the Daily Caller, Shelby and Jorge, and then compared to, what we see from the mainstream media, what they see, what I see, what Brendan and Ford are reporting is very individualistic and without agenda and without time limitations. Here I am talking to you guys for an hour and a half, and there's something very freeing about all of this material not being edited down to a single soundbite and used for somebody's agenda or to push your buttons and make you more emotional about a certain political perspective, because that's how the media operates, and that's how they try to generate engagement. Engagement is fleeting. You can do it. You can get that choice clip, and I've not been a part of that. The one clip that I guess would have, qualified for being ready to go viral, and the clip was when I was inside the Capitol and I captured the long scraggly beard guy and the bullhorn lady and all that. But all of that was stolen from mainstream media anyway and put out there. And so I've never been interested in getting on the clout train, picking up. I mean, look, if you guys aren't a subscriber already, that's me on Twitter. If you're here on YouTube, obviously, please subscribe, hit the button, hit the like or whatever. This is going to develop. This is going to be a Monday, Wednesday live cast where I'm going to have guests on, and we're going to give you another perspective that you're not getting from your regular media diet. I'm going to play long clips that won't be heavily edited at times, possibly, or long sound bites. The freedom here is that we're not limited by time, and so we can have these longer, more nuanced discussions and give you all an idea. I'm going to keep talking to people who have been on the street, maybe somebody once a week, so that you can see that there's going to be somewhat of a consensus of how things have played out since May. That's very different than what you're being told in mainstream establishment media diets, so to speak. So if you have questions, I can answer them. Feel free to chime in. Thank you for the comments, Southern California family. All right, nice. Good to know. Is this old or live? This is live. Some of the clips that I played were old. Something just isn't adding up, Mrs. C writes, as to why the Capitol Police were so seriously understaffed. There's now reports the mayor of D.C. and others refused offer of National Guard days before the riot. That would not be surprising. There was a memo then that went out. I just realized I don't need these anymore. There was a memo that went out, and I would have to look at that a little more in depth. I don't want to speak on it too quickly. But the trend, if you trace back since May, and if you put into light Portland, and that Portland with the really the demonstrations, but there were also attacks on the federal court building. The general consensus was, we don't want federal officers out there. We don't want the National Guard out there policing protesters. So in some ways, a precedent was set, and I think that can be taken into consideration if you're trying to account for why Capitol Police or why National Guard or why federal officers were not more present on January the 6th. And again, as Richie and I discussed, we were expecting it to go down at night. We did not know. Now, when I look back, for those of you who are watching right now, you're going to get an interesting bit of information here. When I look back at January the 1st, for those of you who have followed this podcast, I hosted a conversation between a Proud Boy and a Black Lives Matter organizer from Utah who became friends, essentially. The Proud Boy that we were interviewing said that he was nervous, that you could tell that he had his ear to the ground in a way that myself and the Black Lives Matter later did. That was the point. That was the point of the whole conversation, was to get inside sort of understanding of each other's worlds. Well, the dissatisfaction on the right, we got a fair warning for, I would say, in that conversation on January the 1st, that there was concern because there are people who, yes, as we know, had military backgrounds, who were, for whatever reason, and again, we can go back and forth for hours as to who is wrong and who is right. And I have pretty strong feelings about that myself, is when it comes to how things have played out since May and who's responsible for the Capitol. Because I do, as I've said in many podcasts, lay that squarely at the feet of the former president of the United States, because that was the glue, as I discussed in the conversation with Ford from last week, that was the glue that held everything together, was this stop the steal and this fiction that Mike Pence was somehow supposed to overturn or stop the certification of the election. That was a fiction. And it was perpetuated by the former president of the United States. So I'm clear about where I see certain untruths that were allowed to run their course. But in the end, I think that when it comes to the events of the Capitol, that you put the blame. Now, that said, I separate those who are in the mass populace. And again, from that Atlantic article, that's 90% of the people that are in that populace of people who are not aligned with the Oath Keepers or 3%ers, which are militias that showed up without their guns. Even though armed insurrection trended on Twitter, those groups did not show up noticeably with guns. Again, there were 3 gun arrests, which is on the Capitol grounds, which is consistent with other protests that were in DC, where sometimes people from the right would show up and be carrying concealed carry or open carrying and not understand DC's strict gun laws. So that's not to apologize for anybody. That's just to say that 3 is a remarkably low number of gun arrests on a day that demographic, and is me from someone from the left, I perceive that demographic to be a lot more heavily armed, and they weren't. And yet armed insurrection still trended on Twitter. That's because certain narratives are being pushed. The other one that I'm interested in finding more about, that the Southern Poverty Law Center has been unable to answer me about, is whether any known affiliations for gangs, ethno-nationalist gangs, were represented. For those of you who saw episodes last week, I spoke about how I talked to one of the authors of the Chicago Project that was featured in the Atlantic article, and I asked, were any ethno-nationalist gangs or white supremacist gangs represented at the Capitol? Because in their graph, they had a 1% mark for the number of people that were part of gangs. They wrote me back, and I read the email, and I posted it on Twitter already. They wrote me back, and their quote was, "The only gang that we saw represented was the Latin Kings, not a white nationalist gang." And then they wrote even further, "We saw no evidence of white nationalist gangs." So where does this white supremacist, if we're talking about the impression of white supremacy, I think people who throw that around need to make it clear that it's their impression and that it's not backed up by actual empirical evidence, because the Southern Poverty Law Center, in their extremist report for 2020, put it in their lead-in that the Capitol insurrection was to maintain white supremacy. But where is that backed up by evidence? All I'm asking for is empirical evidence. You can make a impression argument, but be truthful that that's your impression. Show me where there were symbols. Now, the New York Times article seems to indicate somebody from Patriot Front. Now, this would be something interesting to bring up to both guests that I spoke to today, because I'm going to have a later podcast at the end of the week, an audio podcast that comes out with Kim Brown, a activist on the left who I had a great conversation with. But one of the points that I forgot to even make, because we didn't even talk about these group, the right, that much and really going into detail. But one interesting point is that a group called Patriot Front, that is this weird sort of silent pop-up group, and they wear these like invisible they look like mummies. They have these like white cloths on their face. They're super creepy because they don't even chant. They don't even say anything. They just carry their weird flags and act weird and walk through places. That's called Patriot Front. They were represented. They used to be a group that was at Charlottesville. They showed up in Washington, D.C., and barely anybody batted an eye, because when the real ethno-nationalists show up, they're not big in numbers.
Nobody wants to really be around them. They're weirdos. So, I mean, they're just weirdos because they have mummy masks on basically and don't say anything. I think that's objectively weird. And let me see if I can find a date where they actually showed up. Here's the video. It was from the 29th of January. If you scroll down, I actually post this on the 30th. But on the 29th, the actual ethno-nationalists showed up and marched in DC. There's video of that on my Twitter, which is, please join me at Lee Quinn for updates. There is video, if you scroll down on my Twitter to the 30th of January, you see video from the 29th that was posted of the actual ethno-nationalists. The New York Times seemed to indicate that group was somehow represented. I would like to see that evidence. So I'll write the New York Times and ask them. This is what I'm interested in having conversations about. And everybody might get annoyed and be like, well, we're not getting paid to talk to you. Well, I'm not getting paid to do this. So I'm just trying to figure out what the hell is happening in the country. So please answer me back, Southern Poverty Law Center. And I will address these, other entities that are throwing white supremacy around. You know what? I'm going to play you a very interesting clip from the number 2 guy at the Proud Boys. I looked on my phone and I forgot I had recorded this. This is the guy named Joe Gibbs, and he's been arrested for partaking. He has been charged for partaking in the Capitol riot. He was one of the 11 or so Proud Boys that were there among the arrestees of the Capitol. No, there might have been more Proud Boys, but I'm talking about the 193 people that were arrested. About at least 11 Proud Boys were part of that. So I'm going to play a clip from Joe Gibbs that's back in September in Portland. I was at that rally. It was a rally after Michael Reinhold had shot and killed Jay Danielson about a month before. And so there were all these tensions in Portland. And then the Proud Boys show up to hold a rally. Thankfully, the Antifa groups, for the most part, there were some that still came in to counter protest. But for the most part, the Antifa groups, the leftist group bloc, the anarchists, held their rally on another part of town in a different park. I'm talking about September the 26th in Portland. I was at the Proud Boys rally. While I was there, I live streamed on my personal account on Facebook, and I had friends from high school that were like, "You're crazy. What are you doing?" And I think that's because the perception of who the Proud Boys were was so mangled and by cherry picking, really. Because I had this other friend who, believe it or not, was the editor I was the editor of my school paper. Before I was the editor, this other guy who's a year older was the editor. And he's sending me this stuff constantly, which is just classic cherry picking stuff where you judge the group as white supremacists or a certain label based on the actions of maybe one person, or maybe the original founder even, who's very controversial, obviously. The Proud Boys have now been labeled a terrorist group in Canada, which is the country of origin for the Proud Boys founder. So my experience, and look, the Proud Boys have been fighting with Antifa groups for 4 years now, almost. So everything that we've been seeing in the public and saying that, oh, wow, it's been going on for 4 years. It started in, at universities, UC Berkeley. You had speakers that you'd have riots if Milo Yiannopoulos showed up, or if even when Ben Shapiro showed up, there was worry of unrest and so forth. And these groups clashed, the militant right and the militant left. And that's gone back since Inauguration Day in Seattle at the University of Washington, where Milo Yiannopoulos was speaking. And then you had a massive counter protest of leftists. And then you had other people who were showing up from the right, and they were getting into it. A man was shot that day, Inauguration Day, 2017, University of Washington. A Wobbly, which is the IWW, a leftist, basically anarchist, was shot in a melee by a individual who was a Trump supporter, someone from the right who showed up, and he was carrying mace,
but his wife or his partner was carrying a gun. And a melee, of course, breaks out, and you get people, if they're carrying, in this situation, shot, did not kill. This is Inauguration Day, University of Washington. The charges did not proceed because the anarchist who was shot said he didn't want to operate with the apparatus of the state. He didn't want to cooperate with police. So that's just an interesting tidbit that goes back to the Milo Yiannopoulos free speech event. I can't remember. He had a term that I won't, for a name for his tour, but that was his tour where that shooting took place. He incorrectly thought it was the left shooting the right, and then said, well, this isn't going to stop the event. I'm still going to speak, but he didn't know that it was actually the right that had, fired on the left. In any case, the point being, this stuff has gone on. The Proud Boys came about in my research in New York City. They would escort speakers to Columbia University that were in danger of being counter-protest or attacked as part of counter-protest. So when you see that the Proud Boys are a reaction, and you start to parse that, okay, they like to just say whatever dumb thing they want to say, and that's basically the thrust of their platform, then you start to realize that the media's gotten a ton wrong. And I'm going to play a clip from Gibbs, who has been charged in the Capitol events. And this is something I found on my phone. And this is an explanation of the OK sign. The OK sign is still, I saw just in the New York Times the other day that the rioters were citing the OK sign as a white supremacist symbol. I personally made the same mistake in Tulsa in, I think it was June the 20th. I was in Tulsa and I was tailing Proud Boys because I thought they had infiltrated the Black Lives Matter protest heavily. And I thought that if there was ever going to be an event where these folks showed up and bragged about infiltrating Black Lives Matter protests, it would have been June 20th in Tulsa, where the president was giving his first rally. That was that under-attended rally. Well, I was there, and it was my first sort of experience of talking to Trump people and trying to figure out who they were. There were some QAnon people who had Q flags, and quite frankly, I chatted with them a little, and I made up a story of myself. People were like, so where are you from? I was like, I'm from Southern California. When you say Southern California, they think like maybe Orange County. And they're like, oh, and you're a Trump supporter? I didn't want to lie and tell them I was. So I said, no, not really. But I have libertarian leanings is what I would say. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. I don't think I told anybody I voted for Biden, or I was planning to, or I had voted for him in the primary, actually, at that point. But even later in DC, I went into the restaurant, the Harry's Bar, to get food, just to sort of, and that's where I actually met the young kid in the red hoodie and interviewed him, where he's the one who got attacked. I actually told people that I voted for Biden because I was curious what the reaction would be. This is me in Harry's restaurant, because there's Harry's Bar and there's the restaurant next to it, getting something to eat during the day, like noontime of December the 12th. So that's the second Million MAGA March. I actually didn't attend. This is part of why I was late at the Capitol. Those things were boring. The Million MAGA March was pretty uneventful. You could take some video in about 15 minutes, and then you realize it was just a bunch of people waving a ton of different flags, and you really had to be the one to find the racist shirt, because they did find a racist shirt on December the 12th. That was the date that they found one of the Proud Boys wearing a coded shirt that was anti-Semitic. So you could have done that, but it's real needle in the haystack work, in the sense that you go to those Million MAGA March events, and it's a lot of flag waving. Even the South Vietnamese flag is being waved as an anti-communist flag. Kraken flags, like all of this Punisher flags, all of this sort of Trumpist subculture, I found quite boring. So I went to that restaurant, Harry's, whatever it was, and I got a burger, and I was like, I got to conserve energy for the nighttime. And that's when I interviewed the young man that was attacked in November. But I also told people that I was a Biden voter. I announced it, and I was curious what was going to happen. Well, some people were like, pulled back a bit, but then I also explained I had been traveling, documenting civil unrest, and then they were kind of interested because they wanted to talk about Antifa groups and what the frick is this whole Antifa thing? Because if you're from the right, you probably have more of what Andy No's perspective is, which is you think of it as a monolith. You think of it as being some sort of monolithic communist takeover. And so people wanted to talk. One woman I met who was from the South, she said she was a Bernie voter who went for Trump, and that she's having problems, like her kids won't talk or were pissed at her and stuff like this. So these are the kind of conversations I ended up having by announcing I was a Biden voter. I actually found the Trump people quite tolerant. And they even offered me this other table where the young guy was at. They offered me a shot, and I drank a tequila shot with them. And one guy, the guy who bought the drug, he was so drunk. He was, well, fuck you, Biden. Like he was gone. He's just one of those. And when and so he was trying to talk some shit, but his people were actually like, no, don't try to start something. This guy's not, what you not, I mean, I wasn't going to fall for it either. And I think it was kind of obvious that I wasn't going to be some sort of strident leftist in their face trying to change their mind. I was trying to get the story. So I want to know why, with all the power in the U.S. government, nobody is saying who this Q person is. That's a good question. Who is this Q thing? I mean, when it's, you would think that there's enough, but here's the thing. If it's some encrypted hacker that's just basically been trolling it, it's a troll job, when you're able to get a movement going around a bunch of BS, even that extremist, for those of you who are new to me, you can see on publicreport.org, I've redone the website. I have a final report that I've just posted. It's a PDF, a 10-page PDF with original photos, in which I talk about extremism from both sides and how the ecosystem that we're in just feeds itself. It's called A Culture of Extremists. You can read that piece on publicreport.org right now. When you scroll down from there, the final report, one of the last posts, I should say, of publicreport.org was in an interview with a guy who said he did not, quote, have a problem with National Socialism. That's somebody who is a, quote unquote, Nazi sympathizer. He was an interesting interview. I interviewed him on January the 7th, the day after he returns to the scene of the crime, and still in this like black ops kind of look. And talked about, he admitted to agitating the mainstream media and like shaking the fence. And he said about a dozen of them went down to agitate. It's pretty much the closest you'll get to a confession of somebody saying that they were there to agitate. And also somebody who's saying there, I asked him what he thought about diversity, and he was not a fan. So it was a very interesting interview that, in which he also said he studied leftist black bloc tactics. But the thing about this guy, other than him being completely transparent, I was going to say something else about him, and it slipped my mind for now. But I want to show you a different clip that is very different, and then I'll start to wrap this up. I mentioned Portland and how different the ethno-nationalist is. In other words, that guy that's on the front of publicreport.org right now, he is an ethno-nationalist or sort of white, I guess you could use the word white supremacist. That's different than the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys have this sort of, the West is the best. We should be able to say whatever the hell we want and not have to apologize for our existence. That's their take. This is a clip of
the number 2 of the Proud Boys, Joe Gibbs, who was arrested or charged rather for the Capitol. This is him. Oh no, I forgot. I was supposed to convert the clip. This is going to be a tease. You know what? I'll play it on Wednesday. I forgot. It's for some reason this StreamYard doesn't play MOV files, which are QuickTime files. I have to like actually convert it to an MP4, so I have to convert that clip. But essentially, I'll tell you what he says. He says that the OK symbol is an OK symbol. And he says if you put OK in your phone, it comes up. And that's because you'd have to be a dummy to believe that it means supremacy. Now, why do people on the right do it? They basically do it as a fuck you to the left. They do it because it's like, I can do whatever I want and you're going to call me a supremacist. So I'm just going to make the OK symbol and watch you freak out. Fuck you. That's the perspective that I have come to. And when I amended my work, when I was in Tulsa following the Proud Boys, my first draft said, Proud Boy makes white power sign at the protesters. Well, what was when I stopped and I said, okay, is that the white power sign? When you look at the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, they both say that it has to be viewed in context in the sense that you're probably being trolled. That's what the Southern Poverty Law Center says, that it's a troll job, that it started on 4chan. They said, hey, this actually, because Trump would talk like this, he would do this thing. And so they said they would pause it and say, see, I'm not even making the sign, so nobody like takes like a screenshot and says, they would take a screenshot of Trump and then they would take, where his hand was, and they would say, look, that means a W of the 3 fingers, and then that means power. Well, it's a ridiculous assumption. It was to sort of say, see, Trump, it was a 4chan troll job by probably actual ethno-nationalists and troll types on the internet, which, and it worked because the reason that it worked from the ethno-nationalist standpoint is because New York Times reporters are still thinking that it means white power. And essentially what they say is, and I'll play that clip on Wednesday. It'll be interesting to get Brendan's take on it, see if any other people see anything different. Now, can somebody mean it in their heart? Sure. But when I was in Tulsa, I tailed the Proud Boys. Here's my experience in Tulsa. And there's a video of this that I have up. It's called Tulsa Detour on publicreport.org. It's me tailing the Proud Boys. The first Proud Boys were making this sign at the Black Lives Matter protesters who were counter-protesting the Trump rally. And you know what sign they were making from Black Lives Matter? They were making this symbol. So you can argue about who was being the more, the real sort of haters. I got this in my face and I was just standing there in shorts and a t-shirt and an American flag handkerchief, which I would use as my mask, to kind of blend in with the right. So there's nothing. And I got women, white women, shoving the finger in my face saying, go home Nazi. And I was like, I'm not a Nazi. What the hell? But so the energy that was coming from the left, in other words, when I was in Tulsa on June the 20th, was fuck you. So their fuck you back was this OK symbol, which is their basically trigger troll thing to the left. I, in my first report, said a Proud Boy and a Boogaloo, because one guy had a Hawaiian shirt, but he didn't have any gun with him, because there were actual Boogaloo guys with guns who were Second Amendment libertarians, but they were different from this one guy that I saw with this is how freaking confusing it is in Tulsa. I saw one guy with a Trump hat with a Boogaloo. That was different than the Boogaloo that had the guns that weren't Trump people, but were libertarian, 2A Second Amendment people. And then I saw a Black Lives Matter guy with a Boogaloo shirt on who was wearing the Boogaloo and then a flak jacket open that said BLM And so he was doing it as a sort of infiltration or appropriation of them. And so you have this mass confusion, which really peaked on not just January the 6th in DC, but January the 5th. We saw Proud Boys types who had orange beanies. Those orange beanies are representative of Shut Down DC. That's the group that protested outside of Josh Hawley's residence. And I also saw those beanies among Black Lives Matter Plaza attackers who had attacked on November the 14th. One of them's wearing an orange beanie. That's representative of Shut Down DC. So then on January the 6th at the Capitol, you have people on the right wearing the yellow or the orange rather beanies. It's this consistent appropriation of everybody's costumes from online and their trappings, their accoutrements, their tactics, everything that has been going on, for months on years even. It's been this consistent, subcultural pull between these groups that have been fighting. If you go back to the beginning of 2017, that these melees. Someone gave a shout out to Villain is a pro Trump conservative streamer who I know. I would love to have on this show. I'm going to try to contact him some point in the future. I think he's very interesting. He's a right-wing live streamer who we did a joint live stream together on January the 7th in the wake of everything that happened in DC. It'll be really interesting for me and him to connect again, especially because he's been in the middle culturally. I'm outside it. I'm not on the right wing. So I haven't seen people get deplatformed. I haven't been deplatformed. He's been among that. Excuse me, I'm going to cough 1 second. I have to get a glass of water here because I'm getting, when you talk for 2 hours, throat starts to get a little scratchy. But someone mentioned Villain. Yeah, I would love to have Villain on this live cast. We would have a lot to discuss because we did a joint cast on January the 7th. I interviewed Villain, if you're on my YouTube, when he was next to Roseanne Boyland when she was effectively crushed and killed. The way he describes it coming out of the melee, he wasn't in the Capitol, but he was close to it, and that's where that woman died. And so that's on my YouTube, talking to him. He and I had actually spoken with each other on January the 5th, where we saw this kind of appropriation. Now, the right on January the 5th, they marched on Black Lives Matter Plaza, and they went up against the police on January the 5th. So there were a lot, including Salem, Oregon, there were a lot of precursors that we should have looked at a little bit more and said, we're starting to get this establishment, anti-cop thing coming in. I may be running out of gas, y'all, but let me answer a couple of questions here. The ridiculous OK sign being a racist sign narrative is ridiculous as the fist in the air being an anarchist sign that wants to overthrow. People needed to. Okay, so the fist in the air actually means solidarity among leftist groups. It's the solidarity fist. So when a lot of people knew it in terms of the Olympics, where you had the Black Power, it came to be associated. But the fist itself goes back earlier in the 20th century to mean solidarity. It means solidarity in revolutionary politics, in the struggle, so to speak. So it's interesting because I'm saying that it doesn't necessarily mean, overthrow the government, but it does mean revolutionary struggle. It means solidarity specifically. The raised fist means solidarity. In a video I saw, a white person made the fist at the
back of a Black Lives Matter protester in Minneapolis on the 27th. The protester is a guy named Elijah, who I had spoken to, who is known as Pizza Guy on online. Because do you remember in Minneapolis, the Umbrella Man, who was a suspected white supremacist? He was suspected of being a part of the Hells Angels and something called the Aryan Brotherhood. He was a really tall, big guy who was bashing out the windows of the AutoZone, and the AutoZone later went up in flames that night. He is, I think, we could characterize as a chaos agent type, much like John Sullivan, aka Jaden X, was kind of a anomaly at the Capitol. So was Umbrella Man, the exact same kind of chaos agent who was from what we would identify as the cultural right, being a Hell's Angel and a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. But, you know, this might not have been 100% proven, but this is what police suspected. In the affidavit, they actually subpoenaed his phone records, and through the affidavit filing said that they thought he was a suspected Hell's Angel and so forth. So anyways, long story short, that chaos agent, Umbrella Man of Minneapolis, was approached by a fellow named Elijah. And Elijah was wearing a Rasta tam. He held pizza, and he famously says, "Hold my blunt." And he gives and he confronts the guy for breaking the windows, you know, saying that, you know, he's an advocate of peaceful protest. So there's another video of Elijah from earlier on that night, which is the night of that the AutoZone burns, and a white guy in a white tank top, you know, short blonde hair, is throwing stones at the precinct. Elijah has some words with him tells him to stop. As soon as Elijah turns his back, this guy makes the solidarity fist at his back. Now the question then becomes, well, what does this guy mean? He's doing it to the back of a black man. Does he mean that he's saying solidarity? Can he be an infiltrator? The symbols always have behind them the intention of whoever is, and you actually have to like literally ask the person, hey, come here, what did you mean by that? He could be an anarchist who's saying solidarity to the struggle, or he could be an infiltrator who's mocking it and giving what is classified as the Aryan version of that, the Aryan fist, which means white power. So you know, it's really hard to decode a fist or an okay sign. Somebody could mean it as white power. That's completely plausible, but you would have to prove, in my opinion, that person is a white nationalist and means it in a white nationalist way. Otherwise, it really comes from a culture of trolling and a subcultural context that these writers in the mainstream media, I even saw something on NBC, like all these different writers have been classifying it as a hate sign. And even the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, when they write about the OK sign, they say it has to be understood in the context in which it appears, and that it could be a troll job. And that's what I saw. I changed my initial report from Tulsa. And the reason was, I think they just meant it as fuck you. As simple as that. I think they just meant it because they were getting fuck you from the leftists in Tulsa. So I think they meant it as fuck you back. Now, can you go further? One of the Proud Boys called one of the Black Lives Matter protesters a crackhead. You know, that certainly has racist overtones. We could get on an individual basis, we could break down each of these people and say, are they racist or are they not? One thing, though, not that guy, but different guys who are in that Proud Boys group in Tulsa. Later in my video, you'll see under the Tulsa tab, publicreport.org, you'll see, it's so bizarre. This guy, another a Rasta guy with a big, long, you know, sort of tam filled with his dreads, starts playing Bob Marley, and it's Is This Love by Bob Marley. Well, the Proud Boys are like getting down with it, and they start nodding, and then one guy is filming, the guy who had made the OK sign, who had the Hawaiian shirt. He starts filming it, and he's just kind of filming it like, look, Black Lives Matter is chilling out and people are smoking J's. And then this other dude who literally was wearing jeans overalls, a white t-shirt, a MAGA hat backward. He looked like he was on the upper side of 50. He was an older dude. He joins the Rasta dude and lights up a doobie, and they just decide to freaking listen to Bob Marley and smoke pot instead of fighting. And that was one of the weird, the New York Times, when they wrote an article about me, they focused on, I had told them about how people prayed. Even a couple Black Lives Matter people prayed with the Trump supporters, and they did a prayer circle, and they're like, see, we need more, this is like a seed, we need to start conversations like that. Look, that was a cool moment. I have that posted on publicreport.org as part of the story in Tulsa. But the story to me that was hilarious that I like to tell is obviously of the MAGA dude and the Black Lives Matter Rasta guy, smoking a joint together. So when you looked beyond the cultural division and this fuck you, no fuck you, no fuck you, that's this back and forth all summer that was fuck you and fuck you back. When you get beyond that, like, people were like finding ways to have conversations or chill or pray or smoke a joint. You start to realize that people are fighting about a whole lot of nothing. Just calling somebody a neo-Nazi because without it being supported, in my opinion, has not been helpful to this. And so can the OK sign mean it? It could. It could mean it if you had a flag, banner carrying white supremacist flashing it to someone specifically in that vein. Sure, it could mean that, but for the most part, it doesn't mean that. It means fuck you to the left. That's my interpretation of it. Enrique Tarrio, who I interviewed for this podcast, who, some people were saying that I shouldn't have interviewed Enrique Tarrio. That's an interesting interview, and it's only becoming more interesting in time now that we know that he has this background as an FBI informant, and especially because he had told me that he was against the war on drugs. My follow-up questions to him would be, well, did that happen before or after you reportedly, were involved in arrests that were related to the war on drugs as an informant? So is that true? Is it not true? One Antifa press person who I've been trying to have a conversation with, because I think she's very interesting, and she's the Antifa press from the Pacific Northwest. She said basically she wouldn't come onto this podcast because I had talked to Tarrio. Well, my rebuttal, and you got to wait a couple of weeks before you respond to people if they give you an emotional response. My rebuttal to that would be, that's a huge part of this story. I'm glad I talked to Tarrio and got at least, I have unaired footage from that still, and a second part to that I haven't finished. And there's more to that story. I'm trying to get an update. Let's see, a lot of legal stuff is probably going to have to play out before you get many of the Proud Boys willing to speak at all. But especially in this climate right now of persecution, where people are being deplatformed, they're being, some people are losing their jobs and stuff that weren't necessarily, they're being sought after, even if they weren't in the Capitol, even if they were just at that protest, or even if they were at the other protest, the ellipse, the speech, but not necessarily at the Capitol. So we're losing all of our ability to understand each other, our ability to talk to each other, our nuance, our willingness to communicate, because everything's being boiled down to you're a terrorist. You're a terrorist because you were at the Capitol. Well, guess what it was in May? It was you're a terrorist because you were at the Minneapolis, 3rd precinct, or you're a terrorist because you support Black Lives Matter. Now, that said, we have to make the distinction between these Antifa groups and Black Lives Matter. And I'm still calling on the original founders of Black Lives Matter, either of them, there's 3 of them, to talk to me about where Black Lives Matter stands on Antifa leftist direct action. Because those leftist attacks have been attacks not just on property, they have been on people. As Richie and I discussed, we saw from November 14th from the daylight footage, but also as I witnessed, it was unilateral from Berkeley Antifa and Antifa Sacramento, the attacks on people. So where does BLM stand on that? If you're lumped in with these Antifa attacks and burning down, anarchist tactics, they're called insurrecto tactics. The insurrectos were a part of insurrectionary anarchists. And there's a funny conversation. One of the anarchists that went after me after the New York Times article, I'll have to play it to you guys. It's so interesting. He's basically being interviewed. This guy lives off in Spain somewhere, and he's this sort of legacy anarchist, I guess. He's on the younger, I don't think he's much older than 40 or anything, but he's in this interview, he's saying that using a term like insurrection, these are terms that are near and dear to us on the left to represent the struggle against racism and capitalism. So he said he doesn't agree with the term insurrection or even coup. And the anarchist makes the point that, to have a coup, you have to be able to take over these certain points of power, and that Trump didn't even have one. In other words, he never even was in, with the media was never with him. And that's an important part of a coup so this is an anarchist making this point. The anarchists are saying this is not a coup. A real coup would have been something else. The anarchist is also saying this is not an insurrection. That's our term, insurrection, that we use for, the struggle against capitalism and racism. And then they say, so what is this? And the anarchist in the interview, who I won't mention by name because I would love to talk to the guy. The guy kind of attacked me back at the time of the New York Times, but I'd be interested to hear more of this. But his take is it's called a white riot. That's our term from it. Now, never mind that. Now, I understand that it was a majority of white, but there was diversity within it. And being white and white supremacy, again, I will make this argument. I did not have an indication that the majority, we have one confirmed, racist hoodie. Some people will argue the Confederate flag. I think that's one of those things that again needs to be taken in the context and really know. I'd love to have a conversation with a person who had the Confederate flag. Why? Yeah, why did you bring a Confederate flag into the Capitol? Of all the things that you wanted to rep, and the guy's from like Delaware or something, and you're from freaking Delaware. That's another interest. Get this. A majority of the Capitol arrestees, those arrested, were from swing states or blue states. They weren't from red states. That's another interesting detail in that Atlantic Chicago study report. BLM movement has been taken over by Antifa agitators. I would agree with that. I from what I have seen, BLM early on got co-opted, but the 3 founders would have been the ones who could have made that distinction and at least parsed it or addressed it. Now, again, this is a point that I made. If you're the press in the year 2020, why are you not asking Black Lives Matter at every turn, what is your stance on Antifa and anarcho tactics that these Antifa groups practice, these insurrectionary anarchist tactics? Why are those questions not being asked of the head of Black Lives Matter, the founders? They are not the ones who burn cities. Well, see, you do have some conflation, because under the banner of, in the name of it, certainly you had people who were burning things and burning American flags. I wish the founders would come out and talk about this. Okay, thank you, Mrs. C. That's exactly, even before I got to the end of your comment, I was right there with you. I wish they would address this. And if you're in the media, if you're a reporter, why haven't you asked? Why haven't you found out? Why is the public, why have we been, in a sense, deprived that knowledge and understanding? Have you seen their website? The video on the page highlights tactics that Black Bloc Antifa uses. Interesting. What tactics specifically on the website? I'd be interested in knowing that. I'd have to take a look. That site has morphed. It has changed a lot in the last couple of months. Let's see. I would like to check that out. I'll take a look after this cast ends. Boy, I'm still going. It's 2:24. I do like to. I've never been this talkative in my life, so it's exciting to actually be able to talk to y'all and get some of these questions. What do you think is the reason the media hasn't interviewed them? Well, it's a combination. It's not wanting to seem confrontational, not bucking. This is the thing. I am socially justice aligned. People have tried to paint me as otherwise. I think we need to do more to address the legacy of redlining. In my interview with Kim Brown, it's going to be interesting, and I'd love to have her live. We talk about the racial practices of redlining and how certain communities have been deprived of entry and to wealth building. And so I'm a big proponent of subsidizing down payments for homes for people who are in jobs that can afford them, and also addressing other housing issues that we have. So I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to a hybrid of progressive capitalist, but also socially progressive, in order to address the eviction crisis that's pending, and houselessness, and those, I live in Los Angeles, so there's a huge amount of homelessness that I'm witness to every day that I walk the streets. What do I think? Why do I think? I went on a tangent there. Black Lives Matter hasn't addressed this. I don't know. I want them to, because I think for us to move forward as a country, we have to get out of playing political football. So I would like to check that out. They often claim they are part of BLM movement, although Black activists in almost every city strongly disavow the anarchists and communists. We had a discussion New Year's Eve, and Jakari, who is Northern Utah Black Lives Matter, she was like, why would Black people want communism? That was her thing. We don't want communism. I think there are some people who are more leftist aligned that are more aligned with the sort of anarcho-communist tendencies of Antifa. So I think it's interesting because the three women who started Black Lives Matter are certainly entrepreneurial. I've made this point before that one of them has a television deal with Warner Brothers. One of them has a book that was just published and it has been promoting it. And then the other is represented by William Morris. So I see the women who started Black Lives Matter as being incredibly entrepreneurial. And so I don't understand why the distinction hasn't been made from leftist, straight up communists. In some cases, there are Stalinists. Stalinists are militant communists who are known as tankies, and tankies are a faction of leftist revolutionary politics. So there's a lot of distinctions to be made, but if you're a mainstream reporter, you're so far out of that subculture that you're not even thinking. You probably thought Antifa was a myth. I didn't even use the word Antifa until like late September. I was behind on it too, because I was focused on the tactics. The tactics come from insurrectionary anarchists. Antifa is the banner, hey, we're anti-fascists. We're against fascism. Well, who wouldn't want to be against fascism? But behind it is an anarchist tactics specifically that have been used and gone viral in the protest movement, not just from the left, but now we've seen them cross over to the right. So you have anarchist tactics, insurrectionist tactics, insurrectionary anarchists, and then you have competing philosophies of devolutionary anarchism, which is you want to just take down society. You're not for revolution, you're for devolution. You devolve the whole thing, you just scrap it. That type of anarchism. And communism. Some people are communists. In Andy No's book, I am reading it, he refers to them as an anarchist communist. There's a term called anarcho-communists that unionize the idea of anarchists and communists. And these are all real currents in revolutionary politics. The question is, well, how big are they? Well, they've had enough influence that they succeed in getting ignored and having a light shine on them. So that's pretty influential, I would say. Let's wrap up in a second because, as I said, I'm just going to wind down. Front is most fitting. Nobody supports white supremacists. The Patriot Front is that white supremacist group. They, again, you can see it on my Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, everybody. By the way, hook up with me here. If you're on YouTube, it's youtube.com/unblockedlive and facebook.com/unblockedlive. You can connect with me there. And it's interesting. The real ethno-nationalists showed up on January 29th and nobody really cared because, they're not that influential. And so I think this podcast, I'm calling it the Anti-Polarization podcast on Mondays and Wednesdays live. This podcast is going to be about trying to figure out where we can agree and where we can move forward, and where our echo chambers are mischaracterizing the other side. And I'm all about smashing the echo chamber. That's my motto. So thanks for tuning in. I'll try to get to more questions next time. Come back on Wednesday. It's right now we're scheduled for noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. We'll see if this time slot works. We're just going to try it out and see what happens. We might be able to get a bigger audience later on. I'm going to check that out. We're on different platforms. Please subscribe. Link up with me on Twitter. Feel free to float me a question. The one thing is I am very accessible because I've been under the radar for so long. It's a good time to ask any whatever questions you have, and link up with me on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Thanks for listening to Unblocked Podcast Live. This was our first soft launch of Unblocked Live, and I'll be talking to y'all. I'll get this one question. Why not? If entrepreneurial, they benefit from leaving the question unanswered. I would agree with that 100%. There has been some opportunism in not having to disavow the most extreme actors on the left because then they serve a function. Those most extreme on the left keep the leftist struggle in the headlines. They keep the feeling that we're not settling or compromising, and they keep that energy going. So I find it, as a journalist, I would say, hey, address it. I want transparency. In my first drafts for publicreport.org, I said, I'm calling for transparency and insurrection. If this is what we're doing, if the leftist insurrectionists are about social revolution and tearing down the system and burning it down, then I want transparency. Tell me, make that argument. Come on this podcast. Tell me about it. I don't think it's the best idea. I'm pretty sure I would win in that argument. And I think that's why a lot of the Antifa aligned press doesn't want to actually have that conversation with me, because I think I have better ideas that are more inclusive and that in the end will benefit the more people. I think the people on the right, that there's a moment of opportunism that's being missed, where there's all these points of agreement. Look at the New Year's Eve broadcast that we did here, where there were 7 points of agreement when it came down to police reform, prison reform, combating, sex trafficking, getting rid of the two-party duopoly, getting big money out of our elections, dealing with the houseless crisis. There were all of these points of agreement that the right, the Proud Boys, this is a Proud Boy that we talked to on the right, fight the, end the drug war. There were 7 points. Let's start there. Let's start there as a country to begin to address where we agree and just get rid of this constant manufactured feud of litigating the past. And we've had problems and sacrificing a future by being so fixated on it. Yes, we need to deal with the past, but are we going to be so fixated on it that we're not going to have a conversation as a whole country? And that's what I'd like to see. Anyways, somebody just mentioned something about big tech. I am against any kind of censorship. I believe that other people have said this, defeat bad speech with better speech. And let's have that better speech right here. I'll be back on Wednesday. Thank you very much for tuning in, everybody. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. Please subscribe. Join me on other platforms and keep the questions coming. And let's keep the dialogue open. Have a good day.